I've made a solemn vow to never attend another bachelor's party. And believe me, guys, I have my valid reasons for it. The last bachelor's party I went to ended with me sleeping with an athlete and being unfaithful to my husband. I made a colossal mistake, and I can only hope that things won't take a turn for the worse than they already have. I've always heard that bachelor parties can be wild and unpredictable, but I never envisioned myself being on the receiving end of such wild activities. I hadn't even considered participating in any of those wild antics. That's why it pains me to realize that I let my guard down, and now I've committed an unforgivable act. I'm genuinely frightened, guys. I'm so terrified that I don't know what to do. I'm scared that my husband will discover the truth, and then I'll be in serious trouble. I just know that he won't simply overlook everything that occurred that night. I'm filled with fear, and there are plenty of reasons for my apprehension. My name is Elena, and I'm a 31-year-old dancer and choreographer. I've dedicated nearly a decade of my life to choreography, a passion I developed at a very young age. I'm married to a journalist, and I won't reveal his real name to protect his privacy. I'll simply refer to my husband as Dane. He's 32 years old and possesses an unwavering passion for journalism. It might seem like an odd match, a dancer and a journalist, and I sometimes ponder how we ended up getting married despite our vastly different professions. Dane and I have been married for 3 years now, and we haven't started a family yet because we're constantly on the move for various commitments. We decided not to have children until we're absolutely certain we can devote enough time to raising them properly. I frequently travel due to my profession as a dancer and choreographer, and this is how I found myself heading to Chicago for a wedding. It was a wedding for one of my clients, and I honestly didn't know anyone there except for the client, who happened to be an old friend of mine. It's that particular wedding that led me to my current state of narrow-mindedness. Now, looking back, I wish I had turned down the job and never attended that wedding. However, I understand that wishes can't change the past. When I initially got the job, I discussed it with my husband, as I've always sought his approval before embarking on work-related travel. Likewise, he seeks my consent before his work-related trips. I apologize for using the term gig. It's just a quirky habit of mine. Please don't judge me, lol. When I talked to Dane about it, he had no objections. Traveling for work had always been a regular part of my life, and he never voiced any complaints. I think he's usually okay with it because he, too, frequently travels for work. Perhaps he carries a sense of guilt and prefers that we maintain a mutual understanding. Honestly, neither Dane nor I are home on a regular basis, guys. Our schedules often clash, making it challenging for us to spend time together at home. This is precisely why we decided to postpone having children, as you can probably imagine. If we were to have kids right now, we'd probably be the world's most absent parents, unless we hired a nanny, of course. Now, where was I? Oh yes. Dane granted me permission to travel to Chicago for my job, knowing that he'd also be away on business. So once again, we both left home for our respective commitments. Upon my arrival in Chicago, I was met with an extensive workload. As a choreographer, I often find one of the most challenging tasks is choreographing for weddings. It's undoubtedly one of the more demanding aspects of my profession, but it's a necessity to earn a living. My role was to instruct the couple, as well as their bridesmaids and groomsmen, in some additional choreography to enhance their wedding entrance, akin to the trendy entrances seen online. Teaching dance to individuals with little to no prior dance experience or rhythm is a formidable task. It proved to be quite a daunting endeavor, especially considering that I had only a 2-week window from the moment I arrived in Chicago to ensure that everyone performed their respective roles flawlessly. At some points, the lack of cooperation from the participants made me contemplate giving up. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I was on the brink of a mental breakdown. Such challenges are not unfamiliar in my line of work, and whenever they arise, I like to have lengthy conversations with my husband to help alleviate the stress. During that particular trip, I found myself frequently reaching out to Dane for emotional support. However, there came a point when he informed me that he was preoccupied with work, which forced me to cope with the situation on my own. I'm not sure what came over me or why I ultimately decided to attend that specific bachelor's party. I had declined the majority of bachelor party invitations I received while on work trips. The few instances in which I did attend such parties were either for close friends or relatives. The couple in question, however, were friends from my college days. When they invited me to their bachelor's party, I immediately declined without needing time to consider it. My initial refusal stemmed partly from exhaustion due to the extensive dancing and teaching I had undertaken. However, the couple proved relentless and refused to accept my initial refusal. They continued to pester me, urging me to attend their joint bachelor's party. Now, in hindsight, I deeply regret not standing my ground and adhering to my initial response when they first asked. I firmly believe that if I had maintained my decision, the outcome might have been different. When I eventually attended the bachelor's party, I quickly realized that it deviated from the typical bachelor party norms. Instead of celebrating separately, this couple chose to have a joint event. It turned out to be an exceptionally wild gathering, and I instantly felt that I should have stayed home and declined their invitation altogether. The venue was brimming with drinks, and people were dancing as if there were no consequences. Those of you who have experienced a bachelor's party before can likely relate to the sheer madness I encountered. It's astonishing how some couples opt for such exuberant celebrations. In this case, this particular couple left no limits unexplored, going all out to revel in the wildest manner imaginable. I felt entirely out of place and didn't hesitate to request an early departure. The only predicament was that I had arrived at the club in the couple's car, and they had been my ride. My familiarity with Chicago was limited since I hadn't visited the city frequently. Initially, I considered asking the couple to arrange a taxi for me and provide clear instructions on where to drop me off. However, upon reflection, I refrained from doing so, deeming it inconsiderate to interrupt their enjoyment and not wanting to impose or find myself in an awkward situation. My apprehension of being driven to an unfamiliar location by a taxi driver in a city I was not well acquainted with also contributed to my decision. I belong to the category of women who tend to overanalyze every detail and read too much into things. I can easily become overly suspicious about even the most minor matters, and I'll provide you with a plethora of reasons to validate my concerns. On this particular occasion, I made the decision to remain at the party and do my best to endure until the couple was ready to leave. I had a strong hunch that their departure wouldn't happen early because they showed no inclination to leave the party prematurely. I spent my time strolling around and sampling the various dishes on display. I have an unwavering passion for good food and never want to miss an opportunity to indulge. While I was navigating the venue, helping myself to whatever culinary delights I could find, a gentleman caught my eye. He waved at me and signaled for me to join him. I understand that many of you might consider this a rather cliché gesture. To be honest, I was pleasantly surprised that any guy had the audacity to make such a move. I used to believe, somewhat foolishly, that I had an invisible sign on my forehead proclaiming my married status, and I didn't anticipate any guy expressing interest in me. However, I was mistaken, and it seemed that my marital status was not immediately apparent to everyone. Just to clarify, I don't wear a wedding ring, in case you were wondering. It didn't even last 6 months before I somehow misplaced it. My husband experienced a similar fate, misplacing his wedding ring as well. I'm sure we're not the only couple in our situation, given the demanding and strenuous nature of our jobs. We both understood that maintaining something as small as a ring was virtually impossible. During the initial weeks following our wedding, I struggled to keep it on while dancing. There were moments when it slipped off my finger, and other times when it got stuck. Whenever I lost it, I made a sincere effort to search for it. However, as time passed, I stopped trying, realizing that it would probably be lost for good. My husband, on the other hand, lost his ring while waiting in line with his colleagues for a crucial interview. The lengths journalists go to secure interviews, thrusting their microphones in the faces of their subjects, can be quite chaotic. My husband often shares this with me, and it has always piqued my curiosity. My apologies for the diversion. I just wanted to ensure you all understand that I didn't intentionally misplace my wedding ring or leave it behind at the hotel. Now, getting back to the story, when the gentleman waved and motioned for me to join him, I attempted to act as though I hadn't noticed his gesture. My initial assumption was that he might be intoxicated, and would eventually lose interest and move on when he grew tired. However, as it turned out, I was mistaken, and he persisted. He approached me with a wide, ear-to-ear smile. I kid you not, folks. I'm speaking the truth here. At the time, I genuinely believed he was inebriated, but later, I discovered that he was completely sober. Contrary to my expectations, he didn't leave as I had anticipated. Instead, he introduced himself. I won't divulge his real name to protect his privacy. Let's just refer to him as Brandon. Brandon inquired about my name, and I provided it without hesitation. I must admit, I found Brandon rather attractive when he approached me. I couldn't help but notice his exceptionally white teeth, which appeared as if they had been meticulously cared for, possibly with expensive dental work. He also sported a diamond earring in one ear, or at least what appeared to be a diamond earring. I couldn't ascertain its authenticity. He struck me as one of those individuals who invest a significant amount of money in their attire and overall appearance. I couldn't fathom why he had suddenly taken an interest in striking up a conversation with me, but I didn't rebuff his advances. By the time Brandon approached me, I had already enjoyed 1 or 2 drinks, leaving me feeling somewhat tipsy and in high spirits. I couldn't even identify the concoction the bartender prepared for me, but I took a sip anyway. It had an appealing appearance, and I simply wanted a taste. Yet it became evident immediately that it packed a potent punch. Brandon initiated our conversation, starting with some casual chit-chat. He inquired if I had a connection to the couple, and I mentioned that I was their choreographer. In return, I asked about his relationship with the couple, and he disclosed that he was a distant cousin of the groom. Our dialogue transitioned seamlessly into light-hearted laughter, although I can't recall the specific subjects that had us in stitches. The party escalated in wildness, with people dancing, overindulging, and engaging in various activities within the club. I had never fathomed that a bachelor party could spiral into such madness, and I even witnessed the couple partaking in a series of audacious antics with others. I was taken aback when Brandon pulled me onto the dance floor. I want to be clear that I'm not attempting to portray myself as a victim. I was fully aware of his actions, but didn't resist. I allowed him to lead me to the dance floor, feeling somewhat lightheaded. I wasn't intoxicated, but I hovered between a state of consciousness and mild tipsiness. The music and the atmosphere played a role, and I simply went with the flow. I can't pinpoint whether it was Brandon's polished appearance, confidence, or a combination of factors, but I do know that in that moment I was drawn to him. We danced and shared drinks, and that was the extent of it before things took a wild turn. It all began with a kiss, and I can't explain how it escalated into something so intense. I want to emphasize that I had no intentions of it going that far, but I also can't deny that I played a part in encouraging Brandon. Everything he did, I know I gave him the signals to continue. I felt, and continue to feel, a deep sense of guilt because I allowed Brandon to cross so many boundaries. The next morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar place with Brandon right beside me. That's when the reality of my actions hit me like a ton of bricks. I had spent the night with Brandon, a complete stranger I had never encountered before. I practically rushed out of the hotel room, overwhelmed with shame. I couldn't believe I had betrayed my husband with an absolute stranger, which made it even more disgraceful and bewildering since I had no prior connection to Brandon. Before leaving the hotel, Brandon handed me his business card, which contained his contact details. He expressed his satisfaction with our night together and expressed interest in seeing me again. I only agreed to take the business card after he showed me evidence of using protection because I was anxious about that aspect. It was through this business card that I learned Brandon was an athlete, prompting me to look him up online. He turned out to be a young athlete in his mid-20s, and it stunned me that I had been intimate with someone 6 years my junior. It felt surreal, and I struggled to comprehend my own actions. However, deep down, I knew it wasn't some external force. It was my own choices. Prior to the bachelor's party, I had been eagerly counting down the days until I could leave Chicago. But immediately after that party, I found myself fervently praying that time would come to a standstill until I could summon the courage to face my husband. Well, time doesn't spare anyone, and I'm no exception to that rule. It's difficult for me to put into words, but I'm facing the consequences of my actions now. The guilt weighs on me heavier than anything I've ever experienced, and it's truly overwhelming. I used to think that it was the couples who typically made wild decisions at bachelor parties, but ironically, I ended up being the one making the reckless choice. An athlete? Seriously? I betrayed my husband with a young athlete, and I'm genuinely disgusted with myself. I wasn't even fully present on the wedding day, and I didn't capture as many videos as I usually would. Instead, I retreated into my own shell, trying my best to pretend that everything was fine, even though I knew deep down that nothing was okay. The wedding concluded a week ago, but I'm still here in Chicago. I lack the courage to leave at the moment. My husband has been persistently calling me over the past few days, but I've deliberately ignored all his calls. I just can't bring myself to do it. How can I break the news to him? Nevertheless, I have no choice but to return tomorrow. I need your assistance, guys. I'm in a dilemma and I don't know what to do. To be completely honest, I don't want him to discover the truth. I still love him, and I deeply regret my actions. I can't bear the thought of losing him for anything in the world. I made a colossal mistake and I acknowledge that I'm acting selfishly, but please lend me your support here. Update. I've been caught, guys. Dane uncovered the truth on his own. I had hoped that time would somehow alleviate my troubles, but it seems that time has only exacerbated them. They say time heals wounds, but in my case, it's only made the wound deeper. Ironically, the wound isn't even mine to begin with. I'm the one who ultimately destroyed my marriage through my reckless and foolish behavior. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't stay in Chicago indefinitely, so I had to return home eventually. It took a lot of self-encouragement to gather the courage to face my reality. Renting a hotel in Chicago cost me a significant amount of money, serving as a harsh wake-up call that pushed me to go back. When I finally returned home, I was relieved to find that my husband was away on another work trip, having left a day before my arrival. This gave me some respite, allowing me time to collect my thoughts and consider my next steps. I was in a state of denial, trying to prolong the illusion and avoid facing the consequences of my actions. However, I soon realized that this was counterproductive and only made matters worse. I read many of the comments you all posted, but I stopped halfway when I realized that they were having a more negative impact on me than positive. Some people made hurtful remarks, and I can honestly admit that they got to me. What's even worse is that I know I deserved all the criticism and judgment. Sharing my story on Reddit and exposing myself to public scrutiny and criticism is a first for me, and I genuinely hope it will be the last. Remember when I mentioned that my husband was continuously calling me and I chose to ignore his calls? He left numerous voice messages, and it wasn't until I gathered my thoughts that I finally listened to them. In most of these messages, he sounded visibly upset, repeatedly expressing his frustration with my mysterious behavior of not answering his calls or responding to his texts. However, it was the last voice message that truly revealed the depth of his anger. His tone was furious, and he even threatened to travel to Chicago if I didn't return his call. Initially, I brushed off his threat, assuming it was just an empty one that he wouldn't follow through with. By the time I actually listened to that last message, I was already out of Chicago. Fortunately, he also mentioned he had to go for work, which prevented him from carrying out his threat. After reading many of the comments on Reddit, I finally decided to come clean with my husband. The comments made me realize that withholding the truth from him would only brand me as a selfish, deceitful person, and I had to take responsibility for my actions. I won't pretend that I decided to tell the truth just because of external pressure. It took a lot of self-reflection and seeing things from different perspectives to make that choice. I came to recognize that it was selfish to cheat on my husband and then think it was acceptable to hide the truth from him. As many people rightly pointed out in the comments, I acknowledged that I had behaved entitled, and that's not right. Cheating is one thing, but attempting to conceal the truth only compounds the issue. When this ordeal comes to an end, and the truth is finally revealed, I don't want him to end up despising me. One of the factors that ultimately led me to confess the truth was the persistent messages from the athlete. Apparently, he had obtained my phone number through the groom, who happened to be his distant cousin. When I inquired about how he got my number, he confessed to deceiving the groom by pretending to hire me for an event. As soon as I discovered the source, I promptly blocked him. However, he continued to reach out using different numbers. I eventually resorted to completely turning off my phone and using a different one with a separate SIM card, as I grew weary of his incessant calls. Each time he attempted to contact me, it served as a painful reminder of my terrible actions. It felt as if he were an unwelcome presence that I couldn't shake off. At some point, after switching my phone back on, I noticed that he had ceased texting and calling me. It was then that I decided to delete all the call logs and text messages he had sent, finally allowing me to use my original SIM card again. My husband returned from his work trip after just 1 week. Upon his immediate return, he requested a serious conversation with me. I was shocked and anxious, believing he had somehow discovered the truth. However, the conversation didn't unfold as I had anticipated. He was visibly angry and repeatedly questioned why I had behaved the way I did in Chicago. Although it was the perfect opportunity to come clean about what had happened, I couldn't summon the courage to do so at that moment. Instead, I apologized and told him that I had fallen ill in Chicago. He completely doubted my explanation and insinuated that I had some ulterior motive for deliberately ignoring him. His anger was palpable, and he didn't utter a word to me throughout the entire day after his return. On that particular day, I sought refuge in the bathroom and sobbed uncontrollably. I kept questioning myself. If he was this furious just because I had ghosted him for a week, how would he react when he inevitably discovered my transgression? It dawned on me that I may have underestimated the severity of my actions. I came to the realization that forgiveness was unlikely, and I slowly began to come to terms with that harsh truth. Even though I had been gearing up to confess, I was still unprepared for the moment he uncovered the truth. I never anticipated him finding out on his own, and I can attest that I was utterly unprepared. The shock and anxiety that overwhelmed me when he confronted me were overwhelming. I had not adequately prepared, and it was that very situation that intensified my regret for not confessing sooner. It happened on a Saturday morning when both of us were at home, an unusual occurrence given our busy schedules. My husband's anger still lingered, and we hadn't exchanged a word for quite some time. I prepared lunch for us and served him in the living room as he watched TV. I never anticipated his sudden action of forcefully pushing the plate until it shattered on the floor, spilling the scalding hot food dangerously close to my skin. I was so startled that I nearly stepped on the broken shards as I got upset and questioned his childish behavior. It was quite foolish of me to think I could scold him. Little did I know I was in for a shocking revelation. To my astonishment, he retrieved his phone, cranked up the brightness, and handed it to me. As I squinted to discern what he wanted to show me, my breath caught in my throat. The screen displayed screenshots of the text messages from Brandon. The dates on these messages indicated they were recent, leaving me dumbfounded that Dane had managed to capture texts I wasn't even aware of. I had underestimated my husband's intelligence, despite his profession as a journalist, which I had momentarily forgotten amidst my personal turmoil. The messages were so fresh that I was certain they weren't the same ones I had deleted. It dawned on me that he had accessed my phone without my knowledge to obtain these incriminating texts. Among the messages were words that I can't bring myself to recount fully, but one of them read, "I can't forget that night even though I've tried. Please stop ignoring me so I can see you again." The embarrassment of my husband reading those appalling messages overwhelmed me. Brandon had faded from my thoughts as he'd stopped sending me messages. I neglected to check my phone, preoccupied with finding the courage to confess the truth to my husband. It didn't occur to me to delete the texts. In fact, I wasn't aware of their existence at all. When Dane presented the messages, I was so taken aback that I couldn't move, fixated on my phone as if it held the key to salvation from the predicament I'd created. Dane shook his head and expressed his disappointment, spitting on the floor in disdain. He accused me of callously discarding his trust, lamenting how women like me eroded the trust husbands have for their wives. Regretfully, he expressed his remorse for ever granting me the freedom to work as I pleased. His words stung, forcing me to cover my ears in an attempt to shield myself from his harsh critique. As I listened, I recognized the magnitude of my grievous error. realizing that the man who had once adored me was now repulsed by everything associated with me. His cutting words left me deeply ashamed. He chastised me further for concealing the truth for weeks, even though I attempted to explain, my words stumbling and incoherent. Without granting me the chance to speak, he abruptly grabbed his car keys and departed from the house. I spent hours on the floor reflecting on the events, even pinching myself in a futile attempt to awaken from what felt like a nightmarish reality. I had recklessly jeopardized my life in a brief encounter with a stranger, and the consequences, both experienced and ongoing, were beyond anything I could have imagined. The abrupt end of my marriage due to my own choices was almost inconceivable. Each day since that fateful moment has been filled with unbearable misery. I can hardly fathom what must be going through his mind now. The realization that my once loving husband, who showered me with affection, now regards me with disdain and ignores my calls is a haunting torment. I remain in a state of shock, struggling even as I write this to muster the strength to leave the confines of my home after days of isolation. The sole text message I received from Dane indicated his intent to pursue a divorce. He cautioned me to promptly sign the divorce papers without causing a scene, as he threatened to subject me to humiliation. I dare not underestimate his determination to follow through on his words, and so I will refrain from resisting or complicating the divorce process. My conscience forbids me from acting maliciously in this situation. Update 2. I am now officially divorced. Life has proven itself to be the most unpredictable force, as I, a woman who was married just 4 months ago, find myself divorced in an astonishingly short span of time. Life has a remarkable way of bringing you down to earth in numerous ways, leaving you bewildered about where to begin picking up the pieces. I experienced a heavy dose of karma, and it hit me hard. Dane didn't need to lift a finger for me to rue all my decisions once more. If you're curious about what's transpired over the past 4 months, I'm eager to share because I've been itching to make this post. Just as I promised, I signed the divorce papers without any theatrics, recognizing there was no point in dragging it out or trying to outsmart the inevitable. Since we were residing in a rented apartment and didn't own a house, there were no disputes over property and such. I'm also grateful that we hadn't started a family yet. Otherwise, the separation would have been much more agonizing. I relocated from the apartment because I couldn't afford it on my own, despite Dane's decision to leave. I returned to my aunt's house where I had been living before getting married. She's been a mother figure to me, although I must admit she wasn't pleased with me. Neighbors and acquaintances spread rumors, providing their own embellished versions of events. I didn't bother refuting or altering their accounts because, frankly, I saw no point in doing so. While some may be exaggerating and adding unnecessary drama, I acknowledge that they aren't lying, and I brought it all upon myself. If only I had remained faithful to my husband and not sought companionship elsewhere, I wouldn't have to endure the embarrassment and become a subject of ridicule. Some individuals even label me as damaged goods when they assume I'm not paying attention. However, none of these judgments affected me as profoundly as the realization of my own actions. I live with regret every single day, and I'm uncertain if the stigma will ever dissipate. It seems like the entire neighborhood is well acquainted with the full story, and I doubt any man could enter the area without hearing the rumors. My aunt frequently reminds me that these rumors might hinder my chances of getting married. It's been 4 months now, and I've acknowledged my mistake and moved past it. I've spent enough time feeling sorry for myself and have come to understand that dwelling on regrets and replaying the past won't alter a thing. Dane has moved forward with his life, and I deserve the same opportunity. I have a career to return to, and I must embrace the opportunities that have been coming my way. I've learned my lesson, which has been a valuable experience, but it doesn't mean I should linger in the past. I've informed my aunt that I intend to stay with her for just 2 more months before relocating to New York. I've saved enough money to establish a dance studio and an office, facilitating my client interactions. I've tuned out all the background chatter, even when my aunt and other family members try to update me on my ex's activities. I consistently inform them that I'm not interested because I have no intention of revisiting those memories. That's the extent of it, folks. I'm currently working on securing a place in New York before my move. Brandon ceased contacting me 2 months before the divorce was finalized. And I've found my peace since then. I genuinely hope that nobody makes the kind of poor decisions I made, and women should strive to be more mindful and consider the consequences of their actions before engaging with anyone of the opposite gender. Remember to stay safe at bachelor parties. Shalom and peace.